Hello, everyone. It's so great to be with you virtually. I feel inspired by the last session I just saw. I look forward to being able to join everyone in person in the future. But as was mentioned, my name is Alexis Wichowski. I work for the city of New York and have been in government for quite a long time. I also teach part-time at Columbia University, do a lot of writing, and think a lot about how do we use technology in the workplace, wherever we are, whether you're a musician, whether you're an organization in the public sector or the private sector. And it really is kind of a revolution. So I'm going to share my slides and walk you through my thoughts on how we're going to get this done. So give me a moment to share my screen. All right, I realize now this is redundant. I will ask someone to advance my slides then. So one of the things we're going to go over today, if we could go to the first slide, the next slide, is about this idea of human-centered digital transformation, or next slide, changing how we work without freaking people out. Now, this may sound a little dramatic, but honestly, I think that we talk a lot about the digital in digital transformation, and we don't talk nearly enough about the human impact and what it's going to take to get people on board. So that's what we're going to walk through today. Next slide, please. So we're going to go over a few different points today. And as you'll see in this very kind of silly comic on the right, I think there's this expectation of how digital transformation works, that you introduce technology into an environment and it's like magic, this wonderful gift brought to you by some sort of superhero, and everything is suddenly wonderful and better. But then on the right, we have, I think, what's closer to the reality of being given some technology and not really knowing what to do with it, how to make it work, how to make it improve the work that you're already doing, and then going back to the old ways that we've been using for a very long time. So we're going to walk through this process, talk about what people really need, and then we'll talk a little bit about the valley of despair and how to avoid that. Okay, so next slide. Here's a problem. We have a bunch of root obstacles to deal with in the sense that we're human beings. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in or who you are, or where you come from. Next slide. One more slide. Thank you so much. Humans resist change. We're really, really, really hard. It's fine. We find change difficult, even if it's good change, even if it's change we need and we want. It's hard to adapt to new things. So we resist it as sort of this unconscious reflex. Next slide. There was a study done by Forbes in 2018 that talked about almost 70% of change programs failing, not because the IT wasn't right, not because of any sort of other process, but because people just resisted the process of change. Next slide. So the second obstacle goes back to a little bit about what I was talking about in the beginning. Next slide. Next slide, please. Is that it's really not about the technology. Next slide, please. And the reason for this is that we think that we can introduce technology and make everything better, but what we really need to do is make the process of how we work better. But you can't really get people excited on that. As this quote from the New America report showed, you can't sell people on this idea that all management is terrible, but you can sell this idea that modernizing technology is a pretty good idea. So this is one of the reasons why we focus on the tech part and not the people part. Next slide, please. And here, this is pretty much self-explanatory. Next slide, please. Our last root obstacle is that it's just hard. It's hard work. And it's easy to feel frustrated and like it's just not worth the effort. Next slide, please. Also from this New America report, interviewing lots of public servants around the world, they said, I knew it would be hard, but I don't think I had any idea of how hard it would be. And I think this is what a lot of us face when we're trying to introduce change, especially digital transformation in any kind of organization. Next slide, please. So we're real people, we're real humans. What do we actually need to make this work? Next slide, please. Now, most people would not say more meetings. I don't know about what it's like in other sectors, but in the public sector, we have many meetings, and I don't think people would welcome the idea of more of them, but I am actually going to push back on that. Next slide, please. The reason for this is that there's been a lot of research that shows that if you ask someone for a change, to do something different, you request anything at all in a face-to-face interaction or a Zoom-to-Zoom interaction, you are 34 more times more likely to be successful than if you email them. Because we underestimate how powerful our written word is, and we underestimate how powerful our face-to-face communication can be. Next slide, please. So think about this. If the most important conversations you've ever had in your life, how many other people were part of that conversation? Next slide. The most common answer will not surprise you, it's one. We don't tend to walk away from a 20-person conference room meeting and think, wow, that was just revolutionary and changed my life. The big, important moments that we have in our lives, in our work, in our creative process, happen one-to-one, in intimate conversations, in personal conversations where you're really engaged and really hearing each other. So it may be more efficient in some ways to send one email to 50 people or have one meeting with 50 people in the room. I am going to argue here that it is actually much more effective and much more likely to be successful if you book 50 one-on-one conversations. Now, it may sound horrible, that's a lot of one-on-one meetings, but think about it as a chance to have 50 different moments of connection, and you're more likely to be successful. Next slide, please. The Valley of Despair. I love this model because I think it works in so many different areas of life, but especially when it comes to different digital transformation. Next slide, please. So back in the late 70s, these two psychologists came up with this model about the phases of emotional change, but I think it maps very well to digital transformation. So what you'll see here is there's sort of an optimism sector and the pessimism sector of how we view things, how we view change, and this will walk us through how that goes. So when we start off any sort of change, including digital transformation, but really anything in life, we may not know a lot, we're uninformed, but we feel good about it. We're hopeful, we're optimistic. Next slide, please. Then as we learn just what it's going to take and how hard it's going to be, we've learned more, we're informed, and now we are no longer quite so hopeful. We're feeling pretty pessimistic. And then time goes on. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And we hit the Valley of Despair, which is really just what it sounds like. You hit bottom and you feel like, you know what, this is just too much work. It's too hard. I don't see any way that this is going to be possible. Next slide, please. If you push through that, though, you can get back to this place where you're informed now. You know what it's going to take, but you feel like, all right, we're going to do this. I'm once again optimistic. And next slide, please. And you have achieved whatever change you are trying to achieve. So with the next slide and this next series of slides, I'm going to talk about how this maps to digital transformation. Before I do that, I forgot about this one. So the problem with this, with any kind of change, is that we very often go through the first 3 phases and then we stop, we quit. It's just, you get to the Valley of Despair and you think, I'm not going to do this anymore. This doesn't make any sense. And then you're done and you have to go back and start all over again. Next slide. But if you push through, which is really hard, then you can achieve the change you're trying to achieve. Next slide. So let's think about how this works with digital transformation. You're trying to get people to not only change their understanding of a new system or technology, you're trying to change the way they approach their work and their way of collaborating. It's a whole series of changes packaged under this umbrella called digital transformation. It's really quite a lot. So let's see how this looks in this process. Next slide, please. So we start off with introducing some sort of new process. And the step one is you have your one-to-one meetings. And I swear by this because I've done it. I've tried it the other way, written email upon email that nobody reads. And then finally just had a series of one-to-one meetings and was able to convince people that this was something worth considering. So that's step one, just one-to-one connections to introduce this concept of change. Next slide, please. And the next thing you do is you listen. Now, I know that we all know that listening is important, but it's very tempting to defend your decisions, defend the change, to offer ways of assuring people that it's not going to be so bad. None of that. I'm saying just listen, take notes, make a list of all of the concerns and validate people's concerns. Say, I hear you. I acknowledge that. That is definitely something that we're going to look into. Next slide. If you do this, then you'll have tangible things that you can start to work with. Take something that is a common theme through your meetings, a small change that you can make, and start introducing those changes quickly and often and in a visible way. Those three elements are key because you want people to see that you're taking their concerns seriously, you're addressing them, and you're showing them that it is possible to actually make these changes in not months or years, but days. Next slide. And then voila, we have the process of digital transformation underway. And this is the last thing I really want to highlight on this point is that it is a process. It's not something that happens overnight and then you're done. It is a continuation that will go on endlessly as new technologies become available. So consider the fact that this will be something that is going to be ongoing for a long time. Okay, next slide, please. So this is how you conquer the valley of despair. And I'm just going to go through one quick example. Next slide. So you want to get to these, what we call quick wins, so that people can very quickly see the tangible results of their concerns being translated and addressed into an actionable solution. Next slide. You share how that change looks, and you ask people for feedback. Once again, this actual listening process where you're not just doing it as a checkbox exercise, but you're really listening to what people are concerned about, how it works, how it doesn't, and integrating that, next slide, into the next round of updates. Now, anybody familiar with software development will notice this looks a lot like the agile product development cycle, because it is. The idea is that you don't wait for some long rollout and then a big reveal at the end. You do this quickly and iteratively and are constantly asking for feedback so you can update what you're doing. And you'll notice here, you completely avoid the valley of despair. You don't sink that low because you don't ever let it get that bad. Next slide, please. So I'm going to wrap with just two quotes that have really guided me and inspired me in my own work on digital transformation for the city of New York. And this is a quote from the former chief technology officer from who worked in the Obama administration. Next slide. Said, you just have to develop trust with people. It's just change management. And when we talk about digital transformation, again, I think a lot of people focus on the digital part and not enough about the human part, not about the people part. It's really just about establishing trust. And as I spoke about earlier, it's time consuming and laborious to have 50 one-on-one meetings with people to establish trust, but there's no shortcut. There's no way around it. If you want to establish trusting relationships with the people you work with, You have to talk to them and you have to listen to them. Next slide, please. It's not complicated. It's not rocket science. It's just hard. And in some ways, that's kind of liberating because anybody can do this if you put in the time and you put in the effort. Next slide, please. And this is in any situation, especially when change is involved, especially when major change is involved. From a quote from poet Maya Angelou. She said, "People won't remember what you say or what you do." Next slide. People will remember how you make them feel. If you make people feel like they are part of this process, that their concerns and fears are heard and taken seriously, it doesn't matter what you say in these meetings. It doesn't matter all of the little steps along the way. They're going to walk away from this process of digital transformation feeling empowered and included and stronger and more capable. They're going to feel better. It's going to be a better experience for everyone. And ultimately, it's going to make all organizations work better. It's going to make governments serve their people better. And it's going to make humans just happier in general. So with that, next slide. I thank you so much for including me in this experience today. I really look forward to being able to meet you all for one-to-one meetings, perhaps, at some point in the future. So I hope everyone has a wonderful conference. And again, thank you so much for inviting me today.